Hi guys, today we are going to work on the second set of models for the Carabiner Pen project in our class. These are all part of the first assignment, Carabiner Models Part 1, that we have been working on in class. So in today's video I'm going to go through how to create the main body of the pen and the carabiner top as well as the hinge pin. So let's go ahead and get started. So first things first, make sure that you are working in the same document for this whole project. So I have the one that I created as my example for this project, which is my 1A last name, first name, the starting date for the project, and Carabiner Pen as the description. So here's my assembly of what we started last time in the last video. I'm going to go ahead and click the plus sign down here to create a new part studio. And I'm going to rename that Pen Body. And this is the part studio that we're going to create the main part of the pen in. Alright, so I'm going to use the same trick that we used last time to create the pen body, and I'm going to use the revolve tool. So I'm going to create a new sketch on the front view, and I'm going to center my view cube there. And I'm going to first create a construction line that runs all the way down the center. And we'll place that there. Alright, so now I'm going to make the main profile of the pen. And I'm using all of the dimensions that I measured from the pen using my calipers. So I'm going to create a line down here at the origin. And the dimension for that is 0.32. It's half of the overall thickness of the pen. Then I'm going to create a line that will make up the height of the pen. Oops, let's try that again. Starting at the origin, just clicking that up here, and that's going to be 2.4 inches. And then I'm going to make another line up here for the top of the pen, and that number is going to be 0.261. And again, that's half of the overall thickness of the pen at that point. Alright, so that is everything that we need so far, and again this number here is 0.261, 0.32. And I'm going to use the 3-point arc tool to connect these 2 points on these lines. We just want to make sure that it's out this way. I'm going to click that into place. And then I'm actually going to drop a point on the midpoint of this, and I'm going to use that to add the dimension for this shape. So I'm going to use the dimension tool, click on my point, click on my center line, and we're going to define that as 0.353. And now our shape is fully constrained. So now we're going to do the same trick that we did before, which is that I'm going to use the revolve tool up here, click on my shape. You'll notice that this turns red, so make sure that you click revolve axis so that it turns blue. And then I'm going to click on my construction line that we made at the beginning as my axis. So that is the main shape of our model here. And we'll go ahead and accept that. So that's the first part. The second part that we need to do here is we need to add the details on top. So I'm going to create a new sketch, and I'm going to click on the top circle of the shape. Click on my view cube there to rotate that around. And I'm going to add a circle here, which will be the diameter for the next top part. And that number is going to be 0.376. And again, these are all measurements that I collected with dial calipers. Your numbers might be just a little bit different than mine, and that's okay. Each pen's a little bit different. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and place that sketch, and then I'm going to extrude this guy up. Not that much though. We're going to extrude it up 0.147. It's really important that we get this as accurate as we possibly can, because this is the part where our components are going to connect to each other. So that's that part. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to use a tool called Helix, and that's going to apply the threads to our 3D model. So I'm going to go to search, type in Helix, and I'm going to place that. Just make sure that that says clockwise. It should be clockwise by default. So there you can see we've got our threaded part. But there's actually another little piece on top here, so I'm going to click New Sketch again, and I'm going to draw on the very top of the threaded section. And the dimension for that circle is 0.255. So I'm just going to drop that there and then type in 0.255. Hit the check bar, and then we're going to extrude this guy up 0.128. So that is the main body of the pen. That's all done. I am going to go over here and reassign the appearance so that it has the correct color for the pen. So I just made that kind of glossy looking white color. I like to hide the planes when I'm done with the models, so that way it looks fancy. Now you may have noticed that we didn't deal with anything on the inside here. If you really wanted to, you could use the shell tool to hollow this guy out. That's totally fine. We don't really care about the components on the inside. We care really about how things fit on this top part. That's kind of the point of the project, to redesign that carabiner top. So this isn't necessary, but you can do that if it would make you feel better. Alright, I am going to go back into my assembly here, and I'm going to go ahead and drop in that new part. So that way we can just get this done as we go. Click the checkbox to accept that. And then I'm going to click on Fastened Mate, select this face to mate with this face. And it's always a good idea to do this because that allows us to check our work as we go. And that's starting to look like a pen. So we're doing good here. Alright, so let's move on to the next component of the project, which is going to be the carabiner top. And I'll just warn you now that this is a very difficult part. This might be the most complicated component that we've designed up until this point. So don't be afraid to pause the video and go back, just in case you missed something. So I'm going to name this carabiner top. And I am going to start by sketching on the top plane, because I'm going to be drawing up from there. So first we're going to draw two circles. The first one is going to have our outer diameter, which needs to be the same as the top of the pen. So that's going to be 0.522. And again, that's the same as this outer diameter right here on this pen, so that way they have a nice fit. Okay, so that's the outer diameter. The inner diameter, I'm going to place a circle here, and that one needs to be 0.38. And say we've just made this ring, and then we're going to extrude this shape up, just the outer ring, just like that. And we're going to do that to a depth of 0.15. So we've just got kind of this washer looking shape here. Now this is the part that connects on top of the pen body. So we need to add threads on the inside. I'm going to use the Helix tool to do that. Just click on that interface. See that it's got the threads. I'm going to go ahead and set those to counterclockwise. And there is the thread. It's got the same number of turns as the other one, it's just going in the opposite direction. Okay, so now we need to continue working on the shape. And the next part is to kind of decrease the diameter on top here. So I'm going to start a new sketch on top of the shape. Snap my view to top. And I'm going to draw a smaller circle, which has a diameter of 0.5 0.265. And then we are going to extrude that guy up. Now make sure that you select the internal and external so that we get that kind of solid piece there. And we're going to do that 0.127. So if we look at it from the bottom, you can see we've got our two extrusions. We've got the part with the threads, and then we've got this kind of the stop. If we're thinking of this in terms of holes, this would be like a counter bore hole. When it gets to the top here, it's going to make the threads stop tightening down. Alright. And then the next thing we're actually going to do is close the hole. So to do that, I'm going to go back to my top view, and I'm going to start a new sketch again on top. And this time we're just going to draw the outline of the original shape. So I'm just going to draw a circle and then type in 0.522 so that it has the same diameter. And then we're going to extrude this and the internal so that it's a solid. We're not going to do it very far. We're just going to extrude it 0.016 inches. Just enough to close the shape. So if we look at it from underneath, you can see we've got these three parts: the threads, the stop, and the top. And that makes sense because when we look at the main body here, you can see we've got the threads, the stop, and the top. Alright, moving on. Going back to our model here, going back to carabiner top. The next part of this is going to be that we are going to create an offset plane. Now on the original model, the bottom actually has a little bit of a scoop towards the center. So to create that scoop, we are going to draw an oval on top, or more accurately, an ellipse. So we are going to create an offset plane from this top, and we are going to be offsetting by 0.116 inches. So you can see we've just got this surface that's just hovering over the top here. I'm going to create a sketch on that plane. Just going to click it over here in the menu. You can see that it says sketch for plane 1. Click the check. And on this sketch, we are going to be drawing an ellipse. Now to get to an ellipse, make sure you're in sketch mode. We're going to click the drop down next to circle, and we're going to select ellipse. Now an ellipse has three important things. The first is that it needs to be on the origin here. And then we are going to be making sure that we create a horizontal constraint. You can see that when I drag this around, it snaps with the yellow dotted line there. We want it to be aligned there. And then I'm just going to move this to about right here, because the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to add the dimensions that I measured for the ellipse here. So this horizontal measurement for our ellipse is going to be 0.448. The vertical dimension here is 0.285. And if you've done this correctly, then it will be black and there won't be any blue parts on the sketch. So I'll go ahead and close that sketch. And then I'm going to use the loft tool to create that swoop. Clicking on the bottom face here, and then clicking on my ellipse to create the shape that we want. Clicking the green check. So that's what we've got so far. Alright, this next part looks more difficult than it actually is, but essentially we are going to create the main shape of the carabiner. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom out here and I'm going to create a sketch on the front view. Now in order for this to be fully constrained, we need to have dimensions that we can reference. So I'm going to use a bunch of construction lines to create those references. So I'm going to draw one that goes from the origin straight up, and then I'm going to draw 3 that are horizontal. The first one is going to be in line with this plane that we have here, and I'll dimension that in a minute. Whoops. There we go. Did not mean to click out of that sketch mode. So I'm going to drop 2 more lines here. Not that one though. 2 more lines here. Make sure that they have horizontal constraints, which you'll know when they turn yellow. So now I've got my 3 lines here, and now we're going to give them the dimensions that they need. So this top line is going to define the overall height of the ellipse. So I'm going to dimension that from the origin here, and that's going to be 1.642. This second line here is going to be the distance between our 2 ellipses. So that's going to be 0.191. And then the bottom one here is going to reference how tall from the bottom it is. So we'll see. So this is going to be 0.416. You can see that that is just a hair above that other line. Okay. So now we're just going to use the ellipse tool here to define the distance between our ellipses. So I'm going to make sure that I drop this in. I don't want to drop it on the midpoint of this construction line, so just try to make sure that you don't accidentally align it with something incorrectly. And I'm going to draw this so that this is just about right here. And I want this to be 0.4 from the major axis. Now that looks a lot like a circle, but we'll fix it in a second. And then I'm going to use the coincident tool to make it so that this is touching this line. Oops, we need a dot. We need to coincident this to this point. And then I'm going to drop another dot on the top. And same thing. Whoops. Let's try recreating that ellipse with these 2 dots. So we want that to be touching there. And we want this touching here. There we go. And so now I can put in that last dimension. So the distance between these 2. Why is it being difficult? Oh, come on. Don't be like that ellipse tool. Really? Let's try this again. There we go. So now we're still missing that middle dimension. I'm not sure why it's not letting me put that in there. Let's do this. We'll use a point to drop a point here and a point there, and then we'll put the dimension as 0.399. We'll just use 0.4. Alright, so that is the middle circle, or oval, ellipse, whatever you want to call it. And then we're going to use the offset tool to create the other one. So going up here to our offset menu, I'm going to click on my shape. It's going to place it with a default setting of 0.25. We will change that in just a moment. So I'm going to click. It's going to highlight this in blue here, and that's basically just asking, what do you want this offset to be? So we're going to set that as 0.162. And you can see that we're all fully constrained here. And I'm going to go ahead and accept that. And now we're going to use the extrude tool to pull that middle part out. It should look like a big 0. Now if you see here, it's trying to extrude it out through just the front. So we want to change this so that it's, instead of being blind, we want symmetric. You can see that's way too far. So the extrude value that we're going to use here is 0.279. It's starting to look like what we need. It's still a little rough around the edges though, so we're going to use the fillet tool to get rid of the edges on this guy. We want to make those fillets 0.1. Let's try that again. We're going to use the fillet tool to make these edges 0.1. 0.1. There we go. That's starting to look more like what we think it should look like. Okay. So here's the fun part. On our carabiner pen, we have on the front side here, we have that part where the clip or the hinge goes, if you will. So we are going to actually be drawing on the top of this where that goes, and then we're going to use the extrude tool to remove the position of that. So we're going to create a sketch, and I'm going to select the front view, and I'm going to create a construction line on the top because we are going to be using the top of this shape as a reference. So we just want to make sure that we align it so that this construction line is coincident with the top of our shape, because all of the measurements that I collected for this are defined from that point. Alright, so the first line I'm going to put on here is going to be the bottom. And I'm just going to put a line down here. I'm just going to connect it across, just like that. It needs to be horizontal, that's important. And we also want it to be so that the points of this line are coincident with the sides of our curvy parts of the zero shape. So there's the first line. The second thing that I'm going to do is I'm actually going to drop a point over here and over here. And then we're going to define the dimensions for that guy with respect to our top. We're also going to make it so they're coincident with the sides of our curve shape. So the dimension that I collected for this outer point here is that it is 0.627 inches from the top. This inner point I got to have a dimension of 0.457. So we've got two other points that are going in the middle, and I'm going to use the line tool to kind of create the shape that I need. And I'm just going to rough draw this. The only important thing here is that we don't want it to create any constraints other than coincident when we do this. So this is kind of the zigzaggy shape that our profile is going to have. I'm going to add the top dimension here for this middle point. So I got that to be 0.518. And now we just need to add the distances for these internal parts. So I got the distance from the bottom here to this line to be 0.132. From the middle dot here to the top line, I got that to be 0.142. And then we just need to add the distance from here to here, which I got to be 0.053. And that is the shape that we need. Now, the last thing that we need to do here is we need to connect this curvy shape to this line down here. So I also need to add the dimension there. So the distance from the top to this bottom line is 0.537. and I'm going to use the arc tool to create the shape in between. And I'm going to actually draw it a little bit outside of the line, and you'll see why I'm doing that in just a minute. I'm going to do the same thing over here. So again, I'm just making it a little bit wider than I need. And the reason that I'm doing that is I'm about to use the extrude and remove, and I want to make sure that I grab the entire curve. We don't actually have a measurement for what those curve radii are, so by just making it a little bit wider, we can make sure that it actually grabs the whole thing. So now I'm going to use extrude. I'm going to select my sketch, and we're going to switch over to remove. Oh, and we also want to make sure that we select symmetric so that it pulls it from both sides. And just like that, we've got this weird looking cutout. It's perfectly constrained. There's two other features that we need to add on this. The first is that we need to add the cutout down here in between the little middle part where the bottom of the hinge is going to sit, and then we also need to add the hole where the pin will sit. So first we are going to create the sketch for this middle part. So I'm going to pan over here and I'm going to create a new sketch on the right side, and I'm going to zoom in here, and I'm going to be drawing this so that it's perfectly centered. So I'm going to use a construction line, draw it so that it's in the middle. You can see it turn black because it's got a vertical constraint and it's perfectly in line with the middle of the shape. So then I'm going to draw a rectangle on my vertical line there, and I'm going to give it a width of 0.057. I'm not going to give it its height yet, or well, might as well. The height of this shape is 0.29. I'll need to define where this bottom is. I'll do that by applying a construction line that's vertically aligned. It needs to be vertically aligned with the bottom of this ellipse here. So we're going to use the coincident tool, click there, and I'm going to zoom in here and try to align it to the bottom point of this. Come on. How about this? We'll define it from the bottom instead. So the distance that this needs to be from the bottom is 0.409. Struggle. Use the dimension tool. Dimension this to 0.409. Okay. Then we're going to use the constraint, coincident constraint, to make it so that this aligns with the bottom of that line. So now we've got a rectangle, but it's only on one side, right? So the next step that we need to take here is I'm going to use the mirror tool to mirror my rectangle across that construction line. And I did that so that I can make sure that my rectangle is perfectly in the middle of the shape. And the last thing, I'm just going to add a little line down there to connect so that it sees both of these shapes as being solid. So we've got these two rectangles here, perfectly constrained. And then I'm going to use extrude, click both shapes, and remove to remove that part. And that's where our hinge will sit. Okay, last part. Gotta cut that hole out. So we're gonna create a sketch on the front again to do that. And I'm going to use construction lines to define the location of that hole. So I'm going to add a horizontal construction line right there, and I'm going to define it from this top top line here. Oops. And this top point on the edge. This is 0.127. I'm going to add a second one. Right there. And we are going to drop a point where this intersects with our construction line on the curve. So that's going to be 0.037. And what we're going to do is we're going to draw a circle here. Make sure that we switch back over to center point circle. I'm going to put it over here just randomly with a diameter of 0.06. And then I'm going to use the tangent constraint tool to snap it to each of these lines. So clicking on my circle, click on the vertical line, click on my circle, click on the horizontal line. So those two lines allowed us to perfectly define where that hole goes. Then I'm going to use the extrude remove tool, click sketch 8, remove, and we want to make sure that we do that symmetric again so that it pulls it through the whole side. And just like that, this piece is done. I'm going to hide my plane view and hide my reference lines, and that is the carabiner top. Now you're starting to see why we may want to make this design a little bit simpler, because this is a little bit complicated. I'm going to go ahead and reassign the color so that it's the correct color, that awful looking white. And then I'm going to toss this guy into the assembly, go to Insert, Carabiner Top, check the box. We're actually going to use a cylindrical mate here because this guy screws on instead of just being fastened on. So we'll select this face and the bottom face. And we need to select the limit so that it doesn't just slam through the whole model. So I'm going to set this to -1 and 0 and see what that looks like. And that looks okay. So let me try to move this guy and see how that looks. And that looks okay. So that's how we do that. The last piece here is the hinge pin, which, like I said, is very simple. So I will create a new part studio. New part studio. My computer is freaking out. Click new part studio, and we're going to rename that hinge pin. I'm going to create a sketch on the front view to create the diameter of this pin. And we want to make this a little bit smaller than the opening itself. So the opening was 0.06, so I'm going to make the pin 0.055. Onshape doesn't like it when things have the same diameter and we put them together. So we're just going to make it real small. And then we're going to extrude this guy 0.235 inches. Just to make this little cylinder here. I'm going to edit its appearance and make it look like this grayish color, because this is the color that the pin is. It's this metallic gray. And then let's go ahead and drop that into the assembly. Insert, hinge pin. And then I'm going to use a fastened mate to align it with our shape here. Now it's gonna align this wrong, and we can fix that. So I'm just gonna come over the top, and I'm gonna use an offset. Let's try offsetting at 0.1. Wrong direction. Let's try -0.1. It's too far. So let's try -0.02. We just want to make sure that it's kind of centered in the hole there, and that seems to be okay. Yeah, I think that's all right. is the parts that you needed to do for part 1. Be on the lookout for a video where we go through how to do the last component, which is the actual hinge itself. So I will have that out in the next couple of days or so. I'll see you guys in class.